as diversas identidades brasileiras e na apresentação de novas, onde toca um instrumento, o futuro desperta. Nas trocas de saberes, sonhos e oportunidades concretizam. Os projetos que todo mundo conhece, aos que todo mundo precisa conhecer, é valorizando a cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Diário.
Dizer que o Brasil é gigante é um desafio. Mas o país desse tamanho não se abate sozinho. Ele conta com mais de 200 milhões de gigantes, como eu e você. Gigantes que saem cedo de casa todos os dias, com força, dedicação e coragem. Os trilhos, estradas e aeroportos. Gigantes que não diminuem diante dos desafios, não têm medo de distâncias, nem do longo caminho para os sonhos acontecerem. Por isso, só uma gigante como a CCE deve estar ao lado dos brasileiros no desafio de mover este país. A CCE tem 25 anos. E o Brasil é gigante.
Ei, voltei. Tem mais uma, gente. A Flup não para, né? Tá no palco Atlântica, vem pra cá e a gente vai, a gente volta. Último dia, já tá batendo saudade. Monte de corações queridos na nossa plateia. Uma delícia isso aqui.
Let's have some hands, clapping hands for Floopy. Black women have been ignored in all their narratives, have had the intention of showing the world, but not only those that were done by the white man. An example of this is the need of having speeches that include Black women as subjects of the history. And also it was to protect themselves from the activist born in Numali, Aminata Traoré, called as a violation of the imaginary. And Olivette Otele became the first Black historian, to give class in British universities, when she was able to tell the story of silenced people. Aminata Traoré would participate here in this meeting if it weren't an environmental tragedy. Her country didn't allow her to get a flight. Author of African Europeans, Untold History, European Africans, a story not told in a free translation. She is a professor of slavery history and the memory of slavery in the University of Bristol, United Kingdom, is here with us to question, if I myself don't tell my story, who will tell it? Born in Camarões and brought up in Paris, Otele is the first Black woman to become a professor of history in the United Kingdom. With her here, if I didn't tell my story, no one would do it for me. The curator of House of European History, consultant for organizations like UNESCO, European Commission, and World Museum for Central Africa, a começar. She is a writer and written more than 1,000 articles and papers, was co-author many books. In 1921, she presented a seminar for master's students at the University of Paris, the dynamics of culture institutions in free translation, decolonial dynamics in Europe. The third guest of the table is from Planaltina, satellite city of the Federal District, the historian Amida. Ana Flávia Magalhães Pinto. I was almost here. I don't want to give my back to her. She is a professor of the history department and post-graduation program in human rights of ALB. Since March 2023, she acts as a general director of the National Archive, and I'm very proud of this woman. A mediator, if I wouldn't tell my story, no one would do it for me, is a historian, philosopher, and from the academia, Nadia Ariala Kisukichi. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, your name. She re-examined its implication in France and the rest of Europe. She's launching here in Brazil the first fiction book by the publisher Bazar do Tempo. Our acknowledgement to European Union that brought Nadia here to Brazil and is allowing her to be here with us. Let's start then. We pass the floor to all of you.
This is going to be a multilingual table. I will ask the questions in English, and they will answer in French, Portuguese, and English. And I think it's also important, it says a lot about the circulations and the languages. I think that many years ago, or maybe not too long ago, a panel like this would have been completely in English, right? And now it says something about the expansion of the Atlantic and also the expansion, the opening of new forms, if we are able to have this conversation in Switzerland, in Belgium, in French, in the French language, if we're having this conversation.
A conversa incluindo o Brasil e também escutando o português. E eu acho que é uma coisa muito importante para ser feita. E, obviamente, vocês vieram ontem e
earlier, and I am subbing for her, and I'm really excited to be in this incredible company. So this is a panel with 3 absolutely exceptional women working on archives, curation, writing history. Ayoko, you are the first Black... Oh, before asking you that, I want to know, and we had a wonderful introduction of your biography, but I want to know before we start, where... Can you hear? Can you hear me? Portuguese? We are not getting the Portuguese. English to Portuguese? Okay. Apparently, English to Portuguese is too low. It's too low. Can you hear me now? It's better? Yay. Okay, we'll start. Yay. So my first question to you is, how do you introduce yourself? What is your position, your positionality? Where do you speak from? Ayoko, do you want to start?
Tout d'abord, bonjour à tous.
I would like to say that I spent one of the wonderful weeks here in FLUP is incredibly exceptional. It was wonderful. And I have seen many festivals during my life, but a festival like this one with these guests, with this such an incredible public, the quality of the performances, the general environment, the music, all of this was truly, I was incredibly admired with all this, with the quality of FLUPI. I would like that everybody clap these hands for this festival. And I would take advantage to thank also and all the team of the festival that was incredible with us. Everybody that I meet and see are people that are entirely engaged and very positive. It's truly a wonderful work that we're doing here. It's something, an experience that will be unforgettable for me. Thank you very much. So to answer very quickly the question regarding my presentation, I would like to say that today, it's better. Can you hear me? Are you, as a curator, I'm a curator in the History Museum, the European History House created by the European Parliament. But I don't come from the academia. I'm not a historian, and I'm more or less in a crossword of many worlds. I work, I'm an activist, and I enjoy very much this kind of work. I'm not an expert in history, but I come from Togo, and at the same time I'm French. Olivette, please. Ana Flávia is going to speak now, Olivette. Let's see who's going to speak.
I just, it resonates what Ayoko just said. It's been an amazing few days. I just arrived a couple of days ago, and it's been absolutely wonderful. And there's something really, it's not just that people are nice and everything. It's like you feel like you're coming home. And I grew up in Europe, and there's this constant think about trying to find where home is. And sometimes you do find home in places, in villages, but you don't have this complete feeling of just being home, and unapologetically so. So thank you so much for this. How would I define myself? I would say that professionally, but it's also my life, I'm a historian. I'm somebody who's working on memory, the link between history and memory. I'm a feminist. I'm a Black woman. I'm a mother. I'm also a child of the rainforest, because I was born in Cameroon. I grew up in Paris, and I've been in the UK for 25 years. So I belong to all these places, even when people tell me that I don't. I just chose to say that I belong where I tell you I belong to. Yeah.
Thank you. Ana Flávia.
Boa tarde a todas as pessoas.
Good afternoon to all the people here. Once again, good afternoon to all of you here. They're great. Well, the introduction made by Danny was very generous when she started saying that I come from China. This is one of the dimensions that define myself, and I would like to ask those who haven't been to the federal district, I think that everything is Brasilia, to understand what that means. I am a Black woman, activist of the Black movement and of Black women, that from the academia, we have had an upbringing in history and also journalism and languages, this backwards. So my first graduation was in journalism, then I had one in languages, and then I started into history, and there I find a tool for struggle. And this perspective that I've been performing, not only to pay my bills, but also above all, to struggle against policies of memories, against matrix of thoughts of the past, the present, and the future, where we Black people, when we exist, we're always in a very lower part, very little importance historically, and reduced to the image of a slave. I research freedom, and from this place, I have been always performing in the bakery, when I go to buy bread, in classroom, in the National Archive, here in Flupi, and every places that I go, and I end being sometimes very boring and upsetting because I speak about things that people want to forget. But many times it's kind of interesting because I'm thinking about things that people want to remember.
Thank you, thank you. So, Ayoko, you live and work in Belgium. You were the first Black woman to be a curator, head curator, at the Belgium National Center for Fine Art. And you're right now the first Black woman curator at the House of European History, which is the Museum of European History. Ana Flavia, you are the first Black woman professor in your department, and you are the first Black woman director of the National Archive of Brazil. Olivette, you are the first Black woman to have a professorship share in history in the United Kingdom. What does it mean? Right? It's great, but it's 2024. What does it mean for you, that label of first? Is it a weight on your shoulder? Is it a source of motivation? Is it something else? What does it mean for you? Who wants to start? Ana Flavia, do you want to start?
Posso.
Yes, I may start. I'd like to say that after so long, Brazil has completed in 2022 200 years of independence, and the fact that after so long, I'm the first Black professor in my university, in a university over 60 years, and the first main professor of the National Archive of a country as big as ours. This is a sign of the shame that this country lives. I won't deal with that to say that I'm proud of that. No, I'm proud to be one of the many Black women that now compose the biggest populational segment of this country, despite of genocidal projects that are currently, they're being updated generation after generation. But what does that mean to Brazil? It's a symptom of a very big and very severe problem. We were supposed to, our presence should have been natural, not amongst the main victims of birth, of labor, violence, of feminicide. No, we should have been present in any position of society. And over these women like us, there wasn't an expectation that we had to deal and overcome this void of many centuries, this absence of many centuries. And in that sense, I'd like to conclude by saying that being in those places has been an experience that, if it wasn't for the existence of the Black movement and the Black women's movement, it would just be an experience of pain, because the spaces are not accustomed to our presence and they react. So when Angela Davis came to Brazil, and they disseminated the quote that when Black women move, they move the structures, and the structures many times fall over them so that they wouldn't move anymore. And that's what we need to reflect upon. We're proud to survive and now competing not only for the future but also for the past. so that these absences are not felt as natural as they have been, but effectively that needs our attention, our care, and mainly activism, focused activism. Otherwise, we might have the first, and it might take 200 years to have the second again. And over her, there might fall the same violence that falls under the first and the only in those spaces for many years. We're not in the condition of power. We're not in a position of power. We're promoting ruptures. And we're shaking this system of power that it does not welcome us. I see this experience, but we're here.
I'm shaking. You heard that? When black women move, they move the structure, and the structure moves to stop them from moving. Whew. Ayoko.
Oui.
Effectively, in fact, much of what Ana Flávia is saying are contexts that may vary. It's a very lonesome movement. And the fact that we also have a responsibility over all the black people in those minority groups that are not represented and that reflect the image of societies. And our responsibility is to try to open more doors. So we have to be aware that it's a fragile place, but it's also a responsibility. And what I want to convey with that is that it's about something that takes us beyond, and sometimes it's very hard, but when we work beyond what we do for ourselves, we do also for other people and for the following generations that need to be better represented in all spaces and institutions. Isso vai ser um ponto focal da nosso painel. Olivette, o que significa para você ser e única? Essa é uma ótima pergunta.
Actually, when you're the first, it's either it's a favor that the whatever institution is doing, at least that's how it's presented, or you're incredibly gifted and you're exceptional. The problem with being exceptional, it means that you're not representative of your group. It means that actually you're an anomaly, and therefore there's no reason to bring another one from your community in, which automatically shuts the door. So being the first one means being reduced to that object in a way, put on a pedestal, and you spend your time and your energy trying to either prove that you deserve to be there, or that, you know, if you're one of those collaborators, you're proving that you're the only one who should be there. So it's a double-edged sword, and I don't actually see things that way, whether the first or the third or the second. For me, what really matters is, what can you do? These are such big institutions. There's no way you're going to change anything and even open the door to other people, because they always make sure that you're isolated. They don't give you the means to bring anybody else, even as assistants. So you're there as a disruptor. You're there as that grain of salt, or that thing that put the machine, slows down the machine for some time. But the bigger thing is you need to organize yourself outside that. You're just one tiny bit, and so you can't do everything. So what you can do is, I like the term guerrilla warfare. So while you're eating the apple from the inside slowly, you need to make sure that there's a bigger ocean of people outside that is pushing that apple and crushing it from the outside. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. But yeah, it can be interesting spaces to inhabit.
100%. Thank you, thank you. And I am also the first black professor, black female professor in my university, in my department, that is 210 years old. And I agree with this tension between wanting, because we are all products of a community, wanting to be, we didn't come where we are on our own, right? We had food that were given by an aunt, books that were bought by a neighbor. So being where we are is also the result of a community that sees us. And in that sense, it's hard sometimes to say, I don't want to be proud of being this, because it's true, it's a label that if you accept it, creates and validates this idea of, you know, an exceptional person, but at the same time, you also want to be proud of the fact that you are a part of the community. So it's always this tension about not knowing what to do with the label, and I agree with you. What we have to do is to make sure that we are moving things, that the label doesn't stay for another 200 years, and it doesn't take another 200 years to have another Ayoko. And speaking of movements, so you work on archives, you work in museums, you work at the National Archives, you are a historian, so you work with the past. And when I think that European languages are so funny because we speak of conservation, right? So you are working to keep the past as it is. This is how we think of a museum. It's how we think of archives. It's to make sure that things are immobilized and they are kept. Conservation, right? And everything that I hear from what you're saying, it's this idea of movement, moving. How does it translate in your work? Do you think that there is a special way you guys curate? Is there a special way Black women do conservation? What do you think of this tension between conservation as something that keeps the past and the idea of making the past move and be in conversation with the present? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I can start.
Olivette?
Yeah. I'm a historian, so archives are supposed to be our staple. Like, this is the food for the discipline. But I got into history because I saw possibility and opportunity to disrupt archives. Archives are not static, even it's the interpretation that you make of them that can be static. And I've been working in a number of years now on this idea of archive inclusive, which is inclusive archives. And inclusive archives means it's not just the paper archives, it can be a body in movement, a dance movement that reminds you of your childhood, and then that it's the starting point to tell a story. So conservation for me is not at all part of the discussion. I don't conserve anything. The least I can do is reappropriate it. And I'm going to give you an example. My work has been in colonial history, and most of the time you find archival material that were about the plantation owners, their diaries, their vision, their stories, and then you can't find the voices of the other people and the enslaved in these archives. So my whole point, it's like a challenge for me, and it's been my life's work to try and find those voices. That's why I'm a historian and a memory scholar. So I was told that you can never, at the Sorbonne where I was educated, you do not, history is completely different from memory. You cannot be a historian.
Can you tell us what is the difference between history and memory?
Well, what they say is that history is the past that can be, kind of past that can be documented on evidence, if you would. You evidence history, you evidence the past, and therefore you use some source material that can be paper archives and stuff. Memory is to do with people's past, emotions, and it can be imperfect in the sense it can be a recreation, imagination based on myths. But actually, memory is much more powerful than that, because memory is not just what you remember, it's the culture that you created around your own story. So for me, conservation doesn't mean anything. I disrupt the archives, and that's the whole fun of it.
The archive. Ayoko?
Well, my approach as a curator is connected to the contemporary. But it's true. I had to work with the Central Africa Museum in Belgium. That is very particular museum because it unites more than 300,000 objects and artifacts that came from essentially from Congo and also from the ancient Belgian uh, protectorates, those countries that were colonized. And you can feel in that institution up to what point the institution is a colonial institution and up to what point the whole scientific speech is totally built on top of a colonial representation of conservation, of fixation, of solidification of culture that in the end is almost something prejudicial. Always when I go back to those museums, those ethnographic museums, this expression from Alain René in a film that he spoke about the botanic of death, the botanic of death for the ethnographic museums and the way they are able, the way they conserve objects as if they were alive, but those are objects that had a role and use in the past, and now they are behind glass, and you see them as if they were dead. You subtract from these artifacts all their sense, all their meaning, and at last, my role as a curator is precisely, I would say, to show that the scientific speech is not neutral, but is a speech that leads to an ideology, a colonial ideology. Exactly what she was saying. Memory and history are not neutral. This shows how the text was produced. So we deconstruct that and articulate within the museum or the exhibition and try to create other voices that are voices from today that will bring a new light to these objects or shed a new light on these archives. So you are saying very interesting things that I would like to go back to this issue that we're talking about a picture, a way to show to several voices that were telling different stories. And I'll go back to that later. I've done an option to become a historian, and historians have the opportunity to act professionally because history is a profession that is done in the current time, in the present, and it's updated. Therefore, I could be a historian that updates a memory matrix that has already been established, or I could be a historian that puts pressure on those memory matrices. And where are these records that constitute this memory matrix? In the archives, not only, but overall in the archives. I say not only in the archives, but they could be, because everything could be really well organized in the archives, but there are choices that are done that generate a low expectancy regarding these institutions and regarding the experiences that these institutions have the responsibility to conserve, to conserve the remains that are elected as important for this gesture of conservation. Why am I going around so much? To say this. The archives, yes, they can be you. They can be an static place. They can be a place of an only voice. Overall, if the same questions and the same people are asking the same questions again and again, they are created when we consider our national experiences. The archives are created to give memory to what the national state thinks, especially personalities from the elites, white men who concentrate power and money have done. But there is a, a something a, that is extra here. This might have been the project, but the way they act many times make the projects being frustrated, and then that depending on the questions that we do to the most conservative archive, we might start to hear the silences. And when we hear the silences, these voices that were not in the plans to be heard, they start to echo. And when these voices echo, they bring up the fractures, the institutional fractures that the institutional archives have. They shed light on the importance of other experience of documentation, of record organization, of archives that exist as well. We're living due to this struggle against this matrix, this unique way of thinking matrix. We're recognizing a number of other archives that are being influenced a lot by a transformation that the museums have been experiencing, that has to do with what historians and intellectuals and activists have been doing. And in the case of archives, they're shedding light on the importance of private archives, family archives, personal archives, community archives, a very rich universe that not necessarily operates in opposition to the institutional archives.
But enough fundamental attention for this idea of conservation not to be a prison in me. Because when we make reference to Leda Maria Martins, that recovers all a cosmology Bantu, this other dimension of spiral time makes the past not to be in dichotomy with the present and the future. It's not this. And that's we conserve or we maintain present the past based on these practices of not forgetting what was the past, what we've lived in the past. That's why the archives have another meaning, and to keep this becomes to have a meaning of not canonizing people or facts, but of permanent invitation to reflect on what we could do in this instance that connects multiple temporalities.
You, the three of you, what I
De vocês três,
stories are being told, and the way the questions are important, and we have to wonder about the questions. Who is asking the question? Why are we asking the question? And who are we asking the questions for? All three of you are writing histories, you're writing stories, you're weaving past and present, you are weaving stories. I want to ask you, who are you writing these stories for? Who are you writing these stories for?
Selfishly, I write for myself, okay? I want to learn about stuff, so I go out and try and find out. And then I'm writing for people who are like me, who want to know about the multi-dimension of the story, who don't want to believe that there's only one reading of archives or history. So I'm writing for myself, I'm writing for my community, and my community can be multi-ethnic, but it's a community of heart and soul who believe in social justice. Yeah.
I have a question on coming back in the community. Ana Fábio. I like when people say it's completely out of pure selfishness. I'm writing for me.
Que eu estou escrevendo para mim, é muito bom falar isso.
É parte da minha resposta.
What Olivette is saying is part of my answer. Every time I'm writing, I write not for me of today, but for that person that decided to ask questions and find answers. I think about myself, and I think in people that the way I was before starting this process. They had this wish of overcoming this forgetting our past, because here in Brazil we have a sentence that became very popular because of a book which title is Health. It's Health of Black Women. Our steps come from far away. This image of our steps come from very far away. This is very important, but many times we lack the faces, the names, the second names, and the places. So this thing of the steps is very abstract. And I write thinking exactly in people that wish that this is so-called past, to have the face of home, to have a face or feeling of conversation in the kitchen, a conversation in the corner of the door, street gossiping. I write many times thinking about this approach. We can write for the academia, even facing these ways, literally approach. Yes, we can do this, but I write for those as if we're sending messages, and as if we are also wanting to write. And I can tell you, it's not easy, but we need to write together, all of us. So I write for those who want to know about their history. But I cannot lie, even if I had written a lot for the academia. I used to write thinking in the activists that I've met during my life. I intend to continue. I dream with people that I will never meet, but I believe that they do exist and that they're able to value themselves from what I write. Am I very, if we're not going to give a horizon, it's going to be very difficult. So I write for these people that have commitment with freedom and want a lot to have tools to reaffirm this human condition. I'm going to speak very quickly on what you spoke. Of you just mentioned, it was very powerful. And in fact, in my position, I will try to, through my writing, to have voices and spaces to be heard, and making them echo from these spaces, and this gives a dimension and a universality that is very important, because our spaces are generally institutional, where we only have narratives and perspectives that are very wrong. So bringing these voices that are the voices of the minorities, voices that are many times denied and silenced, there is a part of the population that don't have an awareness of this. So to make them, to bring them to our spaces shows that this universality is present. These are not voices that we hear all the time, that we normally hear. This articulation is what I'm trying to find through stories that I'm going to tell. Listening to you, I feel I wanted to go back to universality. To prepare this table yesterday, I walked around Frupi and in the city also, and I was speaking about this subject of the round table to some people. And I asked them other questions. What questions did you ask? And I had a very, very long conversation with some young people here in Lapa, and they told me exactly, talking about this, what story is told in the archives and so on. And they said, no, this doesn't make sense to me. But at the same time, talking about how do you see the fact that we're telling stories from other people? They say, oh, it's quite, it's victim stories. It's not part of my story. So there is a distance in museums. Oh, no, I go when I go with the school, because the school. This is not a space. As the conversation was quite long, what interests us? Understand that this, we can talk about poverty and the dreams and many, many good things. So the message that I have here for you is when these people say, I have questions, daily questions that are very concrete, life examples of a better life, of dreams and survivals. First, it's not concrete, it doesn't tell my story. And third, I don't belong to this. And what do you answer when we say this kind of things?
I almost want to say, if you really are a good historian, your student should be able to see the links between past and present. If you tell me about...
Our presidents are not seeing that link. Our ministers are not seeing the link.
Yeah, but as an historian, as an educator, you have to be able to. You have to make those bridges. If I start my class by talking about, let's say, police violence, I have to go back to the inception. For example, how the police was made, was set up. If I'm talking about, let's say, patriarchy and feminism in the present, I have to be able to explain the inception and how this was control on, for example, women's body. It's got a long history, and archives can help us understand why we are here in the now. Nothing in the now happened in the now. It was built up over centuries, over decades, and therefore understanding the mechanisms and how it's built up sometimes actually help us fight it. But if you don't know that history, then you're feeling powerless. And I think it is important to actually make sure that people understand that archives are incredibly, archives in all forms, inclusive archives as well, are incredibly important, and they are not to be afraid of, you know. They're approachable, and there are many ways to do that. And yeah, if you're a good teacher, you should be able to do that.
How do you make the archives less a place of fear, more approachable?
Okay, so one of the things that I do with first year students is, what's your interest? It could go from, I don't know, I like the sea to I like animals. And one of the projects we did is to look at the history of animal rights, and they're starting in the 18th century. And you see people fighting already for their dogs. But animal rights were actually along the same lines as class division. Only the rich ones were allowed to have animals and to protect them. Therefore, you can link animal rights and human rights and class, you know. So there are many things. And then the students went to the archives, look at that with students, and we unpacked what was happening there. And I showed them that across time, these links, it's been democratized to actually have a dog. So some things have changed. And by having a dog, it was part of the well-being. So we start looking at well-being. So there's a lot to be said about the way we do history. It can be absolutely amazing.
Fascinating and less scary. Ana Flavia, what would you answer? Thank you. What would you answer to the people here who might have this relation of looking at the archives as something complicated, complex, scary, not great, that does not speak to us?
Bom, como eu disse,
As I said, I didn't start as a historian. History chose me, and I chose history. So I believe that in order to try and give an answer to these people with whom you have been talking to, I would like to tell a small story. I still was in journalism university when a professor gave me a newspaper, a reproduction of a newspaper of the 19th century, 1873, called A Mulatto Colored Man. He said, "Read this, I think you'll enjoy it." That's what he said. I got the newspaper, The Mulatto Colored Man, 1833, the city of Rio de Janeiro. And it was a newspaper where people used to question the practice of what at that time was identified as a bias of color. And they used to say that that newspaper was written by people that were dark people, colored people. But no one was complaining about slavery. This experience with this archive document opened a door for me because I came from a school experience where people, black people, were slaves. They were not. They were really slaves. Slaves didn't know how to read or write in a newspaper. And there was no racism in prison. I said, wait a minute, what's this? The process of understanding what the document represented changed my life. I connect myself to efforts that have to do with November 20, when in 1971, Palmares Group faces the 13th of May landmark and replaces by November 20 the affirming a place for freedom in opposition to a place of slavery. And they were doing this considering the requirement of being able to see the path to brought us to the present in the 70s in a different way from what we were being taught. Without the archives, without these vestiges, we can think and say, We descend from kings and queens. But where's my link? And without being able to state my link with kings and kingdoms and with segments of the elite in other societies, I would remain be descendant of slaves without any right to indemnity. So it was in this understanding that I learned how to show archives to people that wish to see it. They have questions, but they have an understanding of archives where places where they will feel uncomfortable, absent, and feasible also. This archive documents seem to me to be the fundamental pieces of a transformation process, because it won't be any good for us to only face the school the syllabus if we do not prepare young people and adults to fight for how this memory is being organized and how this understanding of us will also be established until it becomes a subject for formal education, a subject for reflection and communication means. And also all this seems key. Now in Brazil, we're more and more becoming fashionable in the academic courses. The public history for graduation, that is a history written by people in dialogue with segments of the society. So this seems fundamental to me. It's something that is connected, as being done by social movements for a long time. And it has to be increased because it becomes a two-way path. This festival had the president Olivette.
What I learned of African history from the Afro descendants in the world with the carnivals of Yelaye, I learned a lot from them. And it's in this freedom to ask and go after answers is that the archives are transformed and they are fight for. Because I was in a meeting with traditional communities the other day, and it's easy to understand that there's heritage, the way to, but there's also memory, and the disruptions caused in this heritage that has to do with memory, that has to do with documents, has been compromising the right to the land more than we imagine. So it's time that just like they did in confronting the museums, we will have to confront the archives as well. I am right now the national director of the National Archive, the director of the National Archive, and I can say you that institution was not enough provoked by the Brazilian people. We need more people in there.
She's making me want to take a Brazilian citizenship, get a Brazilian passport so we can come and, move things with you. So, Ayoko.
Je voudrais, oui,
I'd like to add one thing to what Ana Flavia said that was very important regarding the issue of accessibility of the archives, because we're dealing with an essential thing, and in this case the accessibility and the attractiveness of the exhibitions for sure, because finally these young people that you've met and that were not interested, and to them the archives meant nothing, and we understand their stance. So in the institutional spaces, they are not represented. The archives are something that, what archives are we talking about anyways? It seems something official that disregards their history. So the youth becomes uninterested in the archives, and it's normal. Maybe our role, as Yvette said, is to make them understand that they should be elements, essential elements to understand the present. And precisely because of that, I'd like to know, it's a question that I ask myself. In Europe, the whole art group, art movement, and the activism that takes the archives as an element of artistic creation. So thanks to this interest of the artists on the archives, these archives are now leaving, I would say, their sphere, very institutional sphere, enclosed sphere, and are now touching the audience, the public. And these artists make a criticism, they have a critical view on them. History, they work on history or stories that are not there, they are absent from that archive. And I'd like to know if here in Brazil there's also this artistic interest by the archives. And only to add a second point here that I believe is very important, precisely to say to the youth, do not expect the official initiatives and institutional initiatives. Create your own archives, because in the end, nowadays, the history is also being written, being done, and if we use this memory and the archives of our struggles, of our culture, if we don't do it, no one will do it in our places. And I want to give you the example of a collective in the Netherlands. These are young people who are in between 20 and 30 years old with no resources, but they started to collect and keep what has to do with them, things that belong to the black archives. And you may see that on the internet, these black archives. And they're now constituted, and they created a whole fund that has to do with their magnificent history. And they have an open space, a space that is not the academia, it's not institutional space. They are in their neighborhood, and thanks to this fund, they are able to make the whole community be reinforced. And this memory that is being created is there, accessible to everyone. I believe this is very important. I really would like to hear Ana Flavia on their issue. Now regarding this initiative, there are bridges and constitutions, and their archives are shown in other museums, or they only stay in their community. No, absolutely not. Of course, their work is very much asked by other institutions, because they have collected stories that the official museums do not have. And now the museums are looking for that, because evidently the lack of representativity in the institutions, the museums, is a problem for them. So they need to include other histories, other stories, but sometimes they don't have the resources. It's interesting to see how much they are solicited, but it's still, there's an awareness that there's a political instance of this archive, so you have to be careful so it's not instrumentalized. Como é a situação no Brasil?
E ela fez uma questão.
Now she's asked a question that I believe Beatriz Nascimento would be very happy with this question that you asked us right now. First of all, there is, at this moment, it's not merchandising, it's not propaganda, but I'll have to speak of an experience in which I'm involved as well. There is an exhibition called Constitution of the Possible Brazil in the Cultural Space of the mailing office, the National Mail, and it was built on this perspective or articulating this historiography that is engaged, that is anti-racist, that is black, with a black art that is engaged, and produce a reflection that is a kind of fold in time. It's a kind of time fold that it can be a May 14th, one day after the abolition of the slaves, or a 26th of March, which is one day after the first Brazilian Constitution, an 8th of September, which is the independence, the day after the Independence Day, because it promotes a settlement of it reproduces an artistic repertoire that goes beyond the limits that historiography, due to its rigidity, it's so rigid that it doesn't go these places, the academia. So in this perspective, the documents of the archives, the community archives, they start to appear, and not necessarily it's from young people in terms of records or in terms of birth date, because in Brazil, one of the most revolutionary experiences that I know is called Courtney, that has been articulated for almost 50 years by Dom Filó here in the city of Rio de Janeiro. And it's an experience of audio and visual documents. It's an archive of audio and videos that is connected to many others. In Salvador, Bahia, there's the archive of Laje, which is an experience, a community experience that ruptures with any of those Cartesian subdivisions that we tend to divide, like library, museum, education center. In the peripheral area of Salvador, you have a space that is potentializing and confronting even the absence, not because they wish to be present in the hegemonic places, but since it's so embarrassing, this existence, that these two institutions make it mandatory when you say that you have some kind of pretension or intention to have a disruptive, decolonial position. Anyways, we cannot speak of Brazil anymore without these experiences and what they're doing. So we pull a strand that reminds us of the Maré Museum here in Brazil, the SEDOC Guaianazes in São Paulo, the network of archives in terreiros and sacred grounds. And it's a movement that has been allowing the public institutions to rethink themselves, not in the sense of collecting this documentation for themselves, but establishing a dialogue that will expand the reach of a national policy for archives, a national policy or state policy of archives that may recognize these existences, and that's making a total difference. Last year, right, Julia, we had a panel on community archives in the program of FLOOP, and it was amazing that after the year of 2003 to 2023 and 2024, we noticed that this agenda has now been reaching spaces that before didn't speak about that before. For instance, the Brasiliana Library in USP. So we are in a open battle for a matrix of way of thinking in Brazil that is demanding and settling with the past, and we will only know what we were capable of do later in the future. But it's nice to notice, and I can see here, we have been in Brasilia to greet Dona Lydia Garcia, and effectively, Kenya was there at the ceremonial And they used to say there is a person in the capital of Brazil that has been there for over 60 years. She's a black woman that leaves Rio de Janeiro, goes there as a music professor, as a pianist. She becomes the founder of the black movement in that place. And the family created an archive through which you tell the history of the black population in that region. We are prepared to honor this effort of not only having lived, but we left traces that guide our perspectives of future. All that articulates art, and art as a key instrument to rupture with this image that we have been having, which is very legitimate. I would hate the museums if they had been, to me, only that traditional model, as well as the archives in the libraries and even school. But we are systematically competing and confronting and to change that. And we need more visibility. This space is now being consolidated as a literary festival and literature in the broad sense, Floop, as an entering door for our elaborations. It's important to come here to reflect upon that. I take this opportunity to thank you as well.
And please remind me in the time that we have, you touched on something that we were really interested, this question of orality. And you said something so important, because we are dealing with pasts that are not past, that have not passed, right? We are dealing with presents that people don't see the link with the past that we have. And we are looking for a way to build futures. And when you speak, I really see the way you weave in new temporalities, new way of seeing times that refuse this division. I hear this, the geography division, the division of time, and just keep going from one point to another, from the other to, right, from past, present, future. And all of you, the three of you are disruptors. So I wanted to know, Olivette, you wrote we've spoken a lot about silence and how to make the silence, the invisible visible, or the silence heard once you ask the right question. You wrote a book that has been an absolute incredible success. How many translations?
6.
In how many languages? 6 languages.
Yes.
The Untold Stories of
African
Europeans. How was the book received? What is the reception of your work in these ways that you're trying to subvert, change your industries? What's the reception of your work?
Well, I was surprised. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I was surprised by the reception, because I work on colonial history, but I didn't want to start with colonial history. What I wanted to do with this book is actually show that people of African descent have been in Europe for thousands of years. So I could have started earlier with archaeological work, but I started with the Roman Empire and how the Roman Empire actually was much more multicultural than people think, because there were a few, and one in particular, a Roman emperor who was from Africa, and he was one of the most ruthless, but his story was not taught. And then I went back up across time and showed that Africans or people of African descent, either born in the continent or in Africa, and at the time Africa did not have those set boundaries that we know today, and same thing for Europe. I showed that they are circulating across Europe, educating powerful people, being involved in politics, and it didn't pose a problem. It's only with the transatlantic slave trade, and particularly in the 18th century, 17th, 18th century, that you start seeing a devaluation of the intellect and everything to do with people of African descent, whereas thousands of years before that, it wasn't the case, and it's very well documented. So the reception was...
Black carders in Amsterdam, black people had been...
Yes, exactly. And Ayoko, you were talking about making archives. And I really wanted to come back to this and kind of, for me, it's documenting moments that usually were not documented before, because those moments where we transmitted our stories orally, and what was kept was kept. A lot of the stuff were forgotten, and therefore it's a new way to kind of keep that moment, and it's really important because the things that were lost sometimes were actually part of the tools that we learned, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and the tools for resilience and all this stuff. So
how do you navigate that? How do you make archives speaks to you? Like, let's say that the archives is wired to only speak English and you want the archive to speak Portuguese. How do you make the archive speaks a language that it doesn't, when most of the way these histories were through ways that are not coded in, the natural code of the archives, or oral and disappeared. So how do you unearth something?
There are things, for example, I was thinking about what you said, 14th century, 15th century, 14th and 15th century, you have actually people in Seville organizing among themselves, in Spain, yes, organizing among themselves, and actually sharing information from Brazil to Seville about the changes of the law. And do you know how we know that? We know that because one of them, an owner was complaining about those black people congregating, and then he discovered that they were talking about the law, and he thought, how would they know? When you dig deeper, it's because conversations were happening outside those documents and outside those archives. So you have nuggets that actually help you weave a bigger story and a longer story of activism that existed, that has been in place for centuries.
So in the
I love it.
15th century, you had black people leaving Brazil to go create and disrupt with black people in Spain.
Yeah.
I love that story.
Yeah.
I love that story. So what's the reception of your work? And these attempts at, changing.
Justamente alcançar isso de dentro. Peraí. Ela está falando francês? My work, with which we produce this work, and I was going to say that everything depends on where we produce the work, and it depends also the acceptance of this work. Everything to do with the history, art in Europe, our work has to be received by a public that has already been reached, that is attracted by it, that was educated there like this. So I, as a curator, I try to reach other audiences, a public that really doesn't want to know a museum, doesn't want to go to a museum, people that have never been represented. And unfortunately, this is very difficult. And I recognize that in these traditional spaces, I cannot really do what I would like to write and show, the stories that I would like to. It's kind of vital for me to be in smaller spaces and marginal spaces where I know that I will reach and be able to talk to people that are not necessarily interested, and generally they're not interested in the great institutions. So this complementarity, through this complementary approach, I can tell stories and create bridges and generate echo, and also social, cultural stories that are different. Talking about my production is something difficult because the fact of having published some books, being a black writer, doesn't ensure the dimension here in Brazil, this acceptance. What does this mean? In metrics, I know that my last book is the most sold in a collection published by the publisher of Unicamp, where it was published. Where did this book reach? We don't know. Up to a certain point, when students of a primary grade come with a book of almost 400 pages with small letters, and they say, "Teacher, I read your book, I enjoyed it." I said, I think it was worthwhile, but I don't know how many of these students really had access to this book and how. So, in this sense, I understand that, okay, this book was published, but the way that the ideas that are in this book, the way of these ideas circulating, they have to be tested all the time. Therefore, the importance of bringing these discussions through audiovisual material, through dialogue with artists, through dialogues with educators. What am I trying to say? You produce a work and you have to produce your public here in this country. The public for Black writers is one of the things we have to do. If writing is not easy, we still have this dimension of having to work together. That's why being a challenge that is shared by many people and the group grows, that's when I am part of the network of Black writers, and we have been here reaching spaces like the article Nossas Histórias in Bangladesh, and we struggle for occupying communication vehicles that have to be hegemonic. We have wall articles that we write that is called Our Stories. I forgot now to forget. A wall article I forgot. Well, so and other, it's in wall. We have a Historiadoras Negras in wall. I really forgot the name, but in Bangladesh it's easier to find. And the variety of authors is greater because sometimes we produce theses, we write dissertations, and we write books. But many times we're not a priority for the publishers. And this space, reaching this to them, we also work with the channel Pensar Africanamente, Presença Histórica, inspired in prisons African of a long time ago. We have this Presença Histórica in wall in order to increase the amount of public, because this is not structured yet. That's why to create these spaces of formation is very strategic for this production.
Four minutes left. I wanted...
Minutinhos, eu quero que vocês compartam conosco a coisa mais emocionante que está acontecendo agora no seu trabalho. O desenvolvimento mais animador que está acontecendo agora na sua área, no seu trabalho. O que faz vocês acordarem de...
Go to work and just kill everything. Not everybody, everything.
Go on. I would say the most exciting for me in the last few years, it's always been working with young people. That's why I became an educator. But the most exciting thing has been to try and write rap music with young people, and they haven't been able to. They haven't managed to teach me well enough to actually be able to rap myself.
So are you going to rap your new book? Are you going to rap your new book? Can you rap for us?
No, I can't. That's the problem.
I want to hear about black people in Seville, meeting with black Brazilian in 14th century Spain in a hip hop song. Sing by you. I would love this.
I would love that
next year. Flip next year. She promised she's going to rap her new book to us next year. She said it. I didn't say it. She said it. Thank you, Olivette. What about you? The thing that excites you right now.
Alors,
what really touches me so much now, I would say, I'm working in two exhibitions that are very interesting. The first one is about the colonial heritage in Europe and how these stories structure the societies in general in the world. Because in fact, for me, this is very, very important and exciting to change the narrative. Although this is a very critical one about this, it's a narrative that we still haven't considered all the resistance that we had regarding the slavery, regarding centuries of pressure. So there was an enormous resistance also, but also an enormous resilience. And much knowledge, enormous quantity of knowledge and structures have resisted to colonization and are still so extremely rich knowledge. So I'm articulating all this without the exhibition that I'm preparing now with artists from Togo, based on my culture, that is the culture of Togo and Benin, that is the birth of voodoo. And show that all this knowledge is being done universally. And I want to show also that all this knowledge and things that we know that our communities have, that it's a great wealth, we will try to find in these knowledges and share, and to also broadcast this and make everybody knowledgeable how this is all contemporary and that they have a lot of meaning for all the people, for the social challenges, also ecological ones, and the challenges among generations. This gives me very excited, although in spite of all the suffering and all the difficulties that we have feeling as a black person, it's important for us to see everything that we have, all this richness that we have, and to be able to show the power that we have. So what makes me not to give up the people that are here together with me? I am in the university and I meet a university environment that's different from the time that I used to study. I have to organize my class in order for it to end. It has to happen up to 10:10 p.m. because the buses that go to the satellite cities in the federal district, they have a specific timetable. And when I leave, I see a long queue of people, not only from the cities from where I come from, but there are people that seem like me, that look like me, and which I haven't met at the time that I was a student. When I think about the National Archive, I think about all these experiences of community archives of people that are awakening to the importance of their own heritage, family heritage, neighborhoods, movements, and that need to have a struggle within these institutions. But above all, what really makes me get up every day and leave home is the possibility to keep myself alive, to see what these people will do with the world when I'm with less energy than I have now, because I want to have the right to rest a little bit. That's why this is what has made me spend these 40 years with a face of 30. Please confirm this, I look 30. In order for me to become elderly and see what these people that are changing the country and facing the project of genocide, what are we all going to do with this country, with this existence that is ancestral and temporal?
I want to tell you that what excites me is that you exist. What excites me is that you exist in beauty, you exist in strength. The three of you, you work with death, you work with the hardness of our situation in this Western project, and a situation that has been hard, and a situation of death for 500 years, and you do it with beauty. And you show that despite the death, despite our sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers whose life were taken, we are still here. We are still here, and we will be here. There will be Black people in the future. Thank you so much.